Oh, we're going, sorry, the recording's just started. We're going to be sharing the trends that we're seeing in the current market. We're going to be sharing the observations we're noticing when working with our clients around the challenges that they're facing, and also discussing what we're finding in terms of what we think the candidates are looking for in the current market. So as Graham's just said, sort of mics and cameras are off today, but please do feel free to share your questions and ask your questions through the chat function, because there will be an opportunity at the end for Carol and I to discuss those. So please do send them through. But we're going to begin with a quick poll, which is quite simply the question: are you currently struggling to attract talent into your organisation right now? So a quick yes, no, not sure. There we go. So I think what this shows us that, well, hopefully it gives you some comfort in the fact that we are all in this together, and no matter what industry or what size organisation, whether you're an in-house recruiter or an agency recruiter, we are all finding it a challenge at the moment with candidates not turning up for interviews, or pulling out last minute, or accepting counter offers, or accepting your role and then a month before saying that they found something else. So hopefully by, you know, attending this session today and hearing our insights and experiences, you'll all take at least one idea or action away with you that you can then implement into your own organisations. But, you know, we're here as hopefully it'll be sort of an engaging conversation between Carol and I. You know, we've got different viewpoints, and Carol will challenge, but, you know, those challenging questions, it's hopefully going to make you think and question your own processes in your own organisation as well. So
I love that you've preempted that I will challenge. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone that knows me out there will know that. Yeah. And just first of all, thank you very much for having me. I meant to say, yeah.
Oh no, well, no, thank you. And I think, well, over to you, Carol. So what changes have you seen in the market post-COVID, and what, you know, how are those changes influencing the hiring strategies within the clients that you're working with at the moment?
So if I may, firstly, I'd like to just reference the poll, because I thought that was really interesting, that there are people who are saying, no, we're not struggling. And also there were people that were saying they're not sure. And I think that's really interesting. Thank you. That was really interesting, because for me, there might have been a word missing in the question, which is, are you currently struggling to attract the right people? And I think leading into your second question, for me, what I've seen is people actually not really being sure about what they need moving forward. So some companies I'm working with are saying, therefore, we're going to sort of, maybe we've had people leave, or we're growing the division, or we recognise we've got issues in the company. And so we might need an HRBP, or we may need a CPO, whatever it might be. And I think, I don't know if you'd agree, but I think one of the things I'm finding is, if you say to people, what do you need your HR function to do? Almost back there, we're not sure, because we're trying to almost forecast a horizon that we've never had before. So I think for me, some of the challenges and some of the changes I've seen have been, we've seen job titles change over the last 5-10 years, really, haven't we? We've gone from sort of HR business partner, we seem to adopt people partner for a while, and then we had HR directors and people directors, but people directors sometimes weren't directors. And, you know, so I think we've muddied the waters a little bit in terms of people's expectations. I think what I'm seeing is people are still very ambitious, which is fantastic in the HR world. They want to see progression. And I think there is still, I'd be interested if anyone on the chat, you know, violently disagrees with me. I think there's still a sort of perception that there's a progression line, that you start as a generalist, and maybe then you find your specialist area, and then you become, or don't, you know, or you become a senior in one of those things. So I think it's become quite muddied now in terms of what actually does our HR function do, because I'm certainly seeing that we're, as part of interviewing processes, I'm seeing leadership teams look for cultural knowledge, you know, cultural difference knowledge, look for much more areas of integration, areas of well-being that perhaps traditionally we didn't. We all focused on, obviously we did, but now these things have become part of the innate strategy rather than something that was just adopted throughout. So I think the people we're looking for are different, and the role is different, but I'm not sure how easy it is to to summarize that to somebody, really. So we're almost looking for people to be all things to all people. And actually, if our company changes again next year because something else happens, can you do that too? You know, we've sort of added quite a lot of bits on, haven't we? Have you found that?
And I've also, I feel like the role that when you're saying about people partner HRBP, well, two things that when you were talking, I thought, I think we've sort of, it's really hard when we're recruiting to recruit on a job title.
Yes.
We're sort of governed more by the salary, because some clients will say HRBP and it'll be 35k, or it could be an 80k role. So, but on that point, and I'm finding a lot of our clients are looking for a business partner that has, or not just business partner, but any role, whether it's a director or an L&D manager or a recruit manager. They want someone who's got the experience, the gravitas, the strategic mind to deal with the board and the senior stakeholders, but also at the same time, they want someone that's happy to be hands-on. So if one of the team is on leave, they're happy to pick up. And
Yes.
that's been a real challenge for us to recruit, to find those people that, because if you recruit an 80k business partner, they're not necessarily, they're going to be too far removed from the day-to-day, but also if you recruit someone more junior, they're not necessarily going to have that strategic mindset.
Yeah.
So that's
and I guess it was ever thus, wasn't it? But I think it became even more honed, because when we went into lockdown, I'm sure it was true of, again, please tell me if I'm wrong, my perception was that we all kind of went into this, oh my goodness, HR are going to solve everything. You know, HR are suddenly going to know how to run furlough schemes. They're going to know how to cope with, mental health situations that are coming up. We're going to need to be able to people plan in this time frame instead of normally we have a quarter or whatever to do it in. You know, HR had to play, or should have played, hopefully did play a really, really strong part. And it was all hands on deck, wasn't it? Certainly, you know, business I was involved with at the time, it was literally all hands on deck. We were doing the do as well as thinking about strategically what that might mean 2-3 years down the line. Although in the beginning, let's be honest, we all thought 6 months it'll be gone. Who knew? And I think that's a big point as well. I know you and I have spoken about this before, but back in 2020, I wrote a report, and I've just felt in my guts that whether it ended in 6 months' time, we were going to be forever changed, because I don't think any one of us has come, arguably, are we through yet, but, you know, come to this point not thinking differently in some way about either how we're working, what we're doing, who we're working for, and what we want and actually are demanding for the future. I think we've become a lot more demanding as a result.
I think, and I don't know whether everyone feels the same, but I think I've noticed a massive shift.
You said I was going to challenge. I agree with everything you've just said, but I'd also add a different perspective, saying I'm not sure it's always that people are looking through the lens of, I know my worth, I'm going to demand it. I think as well, we are just forever changed as people. I think we're also saying, do you know what? I used to work 16 hours a day because I knew I had to, because that has brought me the progression or the promotions or the recognition that I needed. And actually, I think what lockdown and COVID has done to many, many people is just reevaluation and say, I love what I do. Hopefully, if you don't love what you do, please do something else, because that's my biggest mantra of life. Find the thing that you really love. But if you love, you know, I love what I do, but I don't think I want to do it like this anymore. You know, so I think what I'm seeing is people are being attracted by the more holistic view of the role as well. And yes, I think you're right, money will always play a part. I think it's naive to assume not, but I actually think it's diminished slightly, and again, please challenge me on the chat. I think it's diminished slightly in that people are evaluating life and saying, you know, during lockdown, maybe I had more time with my kids, or that could drive you either way, obviously, but, you know, I've had more time and I've had time to reflect, and actually I've realized I can do my job really well, but I can do it differently. So I think there's a whole lot of revolutions going on, isn't there?
I agree with you. And actually the next poll will probably stepping ahead, but actually I do agree with you, because I think that mindset was like sort of coming out of COVID. I think because people were just reacting to, you know, they were sat there thinking, oh my God, I could go and get 20k more for doing exactly the same job. And I think, but I totally agree with you that I feel like over the last more this year, maybe over the last 6 months, even the last 3 months, I've noticed a real shift in, whereas, you know, the candidates say, for example, when we came out of lockdown, the London market, I'm talking about my Southeast network, but the London market then became a viable option. So, you know, people down here didn't want to
really
necessarily go to London 4 days a week.
Yes.
But then they only have to go 1 day a week. So they're like, oh, I'll go to London 1 day a week and get 20% more my salary. Of course, I'm going to do that. So they then got attracted by the pay, which, you know, probably a majority of us would. And then, or, you know, not necessarily just the pay, but maybe a better opportunity as well. But now what I'm noticing is that those companies are saying, oh, we're going from 1 to 2 days to 3 to 4 days. So now there's a shift in the Southeast market.
It's all coming back around again, isn't it?
Where those candidates are calling me and saying, oh, I don't want to go to London 3 or 4 days. So can you keep me posted on roles locally? I'm happy to take a pay cut because I know it's work-life balance. So it's continuously changing, and people, but I do agree with you, people just reflected on what was important to them. And I think, and the other challenge I think now is that people have got used to working from home and having that flexibility. The other challenge that we're finding is that those companies that are now saying, for whatever reason, there might be, you know, if they're manufacturing, or we've got some like certain clients that need people in 5 days a week, 4 days a week, they're the ones that are really struggling, particularly to recruit. And again, on the chat, you know, if you're one of those and you're not struggling, then it'd be great to hear how you are attracting candidates.
I think one of the things as well, and again, I'm just partly playing devil's advocate here, I'm working with an organisation at the moment, and actually the problem is that in reverse, where they want to work together in the office. But for lots of different reasons, because lots of businesses have downsized their office space, haven't they? And also, I think because of the perception that, and I'm just going to slightly challenge and say, I think if anyone on here is absolutely thinking everybody wants to work hybrid or at home, we need to just make sure we're checking, because I thought, well, I've always worked hybrid my entire career, really. So for me, it was completely normal. But a lot of people don't. And young people, and I don't like to get into specific demographics because I hate being boxed in myself at the other end. But you know, certainly when you're looking to nurture and develop and grow the front end HR people that want to get into HR, they want to be where it's happening. They want to be meeting people. They want to be seeing their stakeholders. So it's a really tricky balance for employers, isn't it? And I think my key tip message, certainly from my experience in the last few months, is I can't decide what you see as value. And I think we do that sometimes, don't we? We say, oh, well, to attract people, we're going to have to give them more money. To attract people, we're going to have to give them hybrid working. Or to attract people, we're going to give them private medical, or you know, or a range of other benefits. And I know you and I have discussed this recently. But actually, unless we're asking, what is of value to you? Maybe at interview, maybe before that, you know, as we're advertising and things, you might say, well, it's great, I've got 20,000 more, but actually what I really want is every third Tuesday off because I have this thing going on now, or you know, I've adopted different caring duties than I had pre-COVID, or just because of life. You know, it doesn't have to be all COVID related. So I think my biggest tip would be that people are now much more aware of an expectation that they can ask for what they value, and we can't always assume what that value might be. Just a really quick example, one organisation I'm working with, absolutely fantastic organisation, have a range of benefits that most of us would probably, you know, run towards with glee. However, a lot of the benefits had been created by probably my demographic age range, and a lot of their new recruits are at the graduate front end. And the heartbreaking situation was when I sat down with them and said, wow, you know, to what degree did the benefits attract you? I was doing some work for them to sort of review their HR. How can we get it where it needs to be? And a lot of them said, oh, I haven't really looked at all of it, which, you know, is a little stab in the heart. And actually what I'd really like is some money on my Oyster card so I can come into the office more regularly, because I frankly can't afford to. And that sort of really brought it home to me that, wow, something so simple may have attracted this person to this London organisation over this London organisation, simply because we're listening and saying, well, then take it as an Oyster card. You know, we're spending probably tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds on these benefits.
Yeah.
Some of that to you to make your life just easier. You know, these are often young people in their first home or still living at home.
Yeah.
What do they want? What will they value at that end? But equally at the other end, what do I value now? Might be very different to what you value, because I think you're younger than me. What do you value? And so I think one of the things I've learned is maybe, and I don't know how easy this is to do, having a much more flexible approach to what our offer is to every individual. Yeah. But I know that comes with its challenges, of course.
No, I totally agree. And on a personal note, you know, in our own team, it's, you know, back in the day, you didn't really, when I first started in recruitment, there wasn't anyone in their 40s in the office. It was, you know, full of young people, and you go out and it was social, and everyone just loved, you know, it was in London. And I think there's a real shift in, like, the actually in our office now, there's probably like 50% over 40 and 50% under 40, but so that's to that point. What the graduates coming in are looking for, if they actually want to be in. So if I said to Lily on my team, oh, you can only come in once a week, she'd probably leave, because she wants to be in like 4 days a week. She loves the flexibility of having like a day from home, but she wants to. And the other opportunity, the other L&D point of that is that actually what we've noticed, especially when we hired in, you know, when everyone was working from home, is that the people, the turnover was really high, because I think there was low engagement. And also, you know, in our job, but also other jobs, you learn from just being around the senior experienced people. And if you're sitting in your bed, the other thing is the demographic of these people.
Absolutely, sitting in a bedroom, yeah, absolutely.
It's not good for their well-being, and I think.
And probably a huge number of us on this call are probably made up of tiny little bits of all the wonderful people we've worked in our lives, haven't we? Because we adopt, okay, you know, I like how they did that, I'm going to replicate that, our role models. And we are single-handedly removing access to role models if we go the full, you know, remote work, aren't we? Yeah.
Well, that's quite really a good segue into our next poll. So sort of I know we've sort of briefly talked about it, but sort of, you know, when moving roles, you know, in your organisations, when you're having exit interviews or when you're talking to people when they're leaving, what do you believe is the main factor behind their decision? I mean, these are quite traditional sort of reasons. I mean, is it better pay, benefits, more flexibility, opportunity to work from home, better career development opportunities, or anything else? And if it is anything else, it'd be useful, you know, to pop that in the chat. I'll just give that a few seconds. And
it'd be interesting to expand that and say what would make you move on as well.
Yeah.
Because I absolutely know what made me move on, and I'll share with you in a moment.
Oh, so there we go. So interestingly, a recent McKinsey report that I read did cite that 41%, I think it was, of candidates were leaving their current roles because of lack of upward progression. But actually, interestingly, in that report, other reasons were they left for an uninspiring manager, lack of meaningful work. And I think we were talking about this before, but I've noticed a shift between, again, directly post-COVID. I think people were leaving, making that sort of knee-jerk action and following the pay. But I've noticed, like I said earlier, people are now moving. If they're in London, they want to be closer to home, work-life balance, and then happy to take a drop in pay to come out of London to have that better work-life balance again. And I think in terms of the career progression opportunities, I think that's probably is backed up. And I think that is probably one of the main reasons. And alongside, like, people just being a bit bored and stagnant in their current roles and not feeling inspired, I suppose, by their managers. So
I'd like to again just play devil's advocate a little bit. I think and I'd really love if anybody agrees or violently disagrees with me, but I think when we talk about career development as well, we shouldn't necessarily always assume it's an upward trajectory, because I think, again, one of the things I'm seeing coming, you know, in recent years is people having that life evaluation and saying, actually, I found the thing I really love. I found the thing I'm really good at. And what I've seen, again, I don't know if anybody else has shared, has also seen this. I've seen people shift roles, people that were perhaps, one individual springs to mind, was a pay and reward specialist and had been for many, many years. Because she was pulled into all sorts of different things when we all started doing all things to all people, she actually found that L&D was a place she loved, and she loved the engagement aspect. She still had the analytical and the data and the strategic expertise. Of course, you don't suddenly give that away with your job title. So she brought a whole new perspective to helping support people through the strategic planning and resourcing and analytics that's needed in a crisis. So she's now moved completely into a sort of OD, I guess almost crisis management L&D role. I don't know, that goes back to our job titles. What would you call that, really?
No.
But she's doing amazingly well. So I think people are evaluating where I want to be. And I think as well, what we didn't put in the poll, because it's a very hard question to ask, is people that are leaving for values-based reasons now. So I made a decision, conscious decision, probably 5-10 years ago now, that I realized I couldn't thrive in an environment where I didn't share any common values with the people that were directing my career. Yeah. And by that, I mean, obviously, you're not going to agree with every decision that's made, but there has to be a fundamental point at which you say, this environment feels safe to me, this culture feels flexible enough for me. I buy into and I share the purpose of the organization. And we know that without that, teams just don't pull together. So, and I think what I've seen, it certainly made me make some radical changes, actually several times. And I think what I've seen is other people saying, do you know what, I don't have to do this anymore. There are options, because we've proven that organizations can be flexible. I mean, gosh, isn't it funny? It only feels like yesterday when I know I did, and you probably have worked with companies that said, we don't do remote homework. There's no remote home working because it doesn't work.
No, I know.
And I know there's still a debate, really interested to hear. There's still a debate around that, but actually I think we have proven, yes, it does. It does within the flexibilities and the values of the people doing it. I think that's, and the management you mentioned as well. So really, really interesting that it's not pay. And I'm just one more thing to add. I think what I would say to everybody on the call as well is, do we ask enough questions of people that leave? Or actually, are we quite relieved when they say pay? Because that enables us to write the report for whomever we're writing the report for with a really credible reason. It's not that our managers aren't managing. It's not that the culture is a bit toxic. It's not that we've got people in the wrong jobs. It's not that we badly led them, or we wouldn't, because we're in HR. But it's not that as a company we badly led them. It's not errors of judgment, etc., etc., etc. We can go and say, yeah, do you know what? We've had 20% of people have left because of pay, which also gives us the ammunition to push for pay rises. So it's quite a convenient answer. And I know I'm being a bit challenging here, but I personally don't believe that 50%, I'm going to throw a number in there with absolutely no scientific data, but in my head, 50% of the people who say pay, there will be something else that is actually so again, happy to be challenged.
I agree.
To ask those questions.
I agree, and I don't necessarily think people are asking those questions. I think you're right. I think I had an example the other day of that, going back to your point of, it's not necessarily, it doesn't always necessarily have to be the upward progression, can be sideways.
It's just development,
coming out of HR, and one of the best, he's one of my, I think he's a great manager, and he's one of my sort of long-standing clients, and he said to me, he has such a good open relationship with his team in terms of just having career catch-ups, but not in a formal way, just really getting to know his team and asking them what is important to them. And I think, we can gloss it up with all of these fancy things, but actually people just want to be respected, valued, and listened to. And he did just that. And then he was sort of like, oh, great. So basically what happened was he had this great career conversation, and it turned out that she wanted to move internally to the legal team and grow her career there. So she came out, he then has to obviously backfill her role, but they retained her. Whereas she might have then just left and gone to do that in another organisation. So
but this brings,
absolutely.
And this comes back to my biggest bugbear, or not bugbear, but my biggest soapbox, I suppose, and it's what I spend my life talking about now, is we don't, and by we I mean the world's organisations, we don't often send people on management training development or give them any form of coaching or anything until they are already managers. If you go to a management seminar, everybody in the room is a manager, which probably sounds really logical, but actually that pre-management training would probably deselect some of them who at their own admission a year later say, I shouldn't be allowed near humans, I'm really good at what I do, but I don't want to do this. So we don't do that. We don't get our managers ready. And I think coming back to our role in HR, it's really tough sometimes, isn't it? Because how often do we sit in meetings saying, well, the managers have got to do that. We're going to push this out through the managers. The leadership team will lead this and the managers will they'll just have to do it. This is often the conflict, but the managers aren't equipped to sometimes. And I don't always hold them at fault. I do hold them accountable for not seeking support, just saying, but they often don't know what they don't know. And so coming back to your very first question, I think one of the struggles for us in HR is, and again, interested to hear, is our HR, whatever form of HR you're in, we're all having to become L&D experts, which as an L&D professional for 25 years, I know it's not as easy as we make it look, obviously, but it's not, it is a role unto itself. Are we all being expected to be able to coach our managers, lead our managers, develop our managers in the areas we need them to, as well as doing our equation of that? I don't know. And that's tough for many people, isn't it?
No, I know. I think it's I do think if you get that right, though, I think retention.
Oh, absolutely.
Because as the old cliche goes, you don't leave a job, you leave a bad manager.
Yeah. Still true, isn't it?
It's still true, yeah. So another point that I wanted sort of to get your insight and experience on, and I'm happy to share this because it's one of my bugbears, but is a bad recruitment process. So this is one of the, if you're looking to attract the best talent, the companies that have swift, engaging recruitment processes and amazing onboarding, they are the ones attracting the right talent. And, candidates aren't waiting around like 2 weeks now, well, they ever did, but they're not waiting around for feedback. You could, if you send a CV today and call them in 2 weeks, they're like, oh, I'm already in final stage of three other processes. So I just wanted to have a final point and discuss sort of the do's and don'ts of a good recruitment process. And then what do you see with it? Have you got clients that do it really well, and what are the learns from the ones that don't do it so well?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think it almost goes back to what I was just on a rant about, really, that hiring is also a real skill, isn't it? And yet we sort of assume that when somebody moves into a team leader role or a manager role, over that weekend, osmosis means they've suddenly learned how to interview and how to hire and how to assess, etc. So again, I wonder if they lean on HR enough, who are the experts in this. But often what I've seen, to answer the sort of more negative first, is where HR simply become an internal conduit from people like your lovely self, and they simply pass the messages on and say, oh, I've set up interviews for you with Fred Smith, and then the manager does the interview and they work with whatever comes out of it. But actually, in fairness, that manager may not have been coached in how to hire or interview correctly. At best, it's a bad judgment call. At worst, there's legal implications, of course, when things are said. And I've had experience recently of supporting an organisation where we would think outrageous, all of us on the call would go, no, but actually the manager, it wasn't with intent, it was out of pure lack of knowledge. So I think that's really poor. If people are interviewed by bad interviewers, that's their very first impression of the organisation. And you're right, I've had businesses that have said, Carol, we don't know what's wrong, can you help develop our team? Because we did loads of interviewing for these roles. How many? We had 8 interviews. And you sort of think, well, that's kind of probably where the problem started, So I think you're right. We work in an environment, we live in a world of instant gratification these days, don't we? If we order something, we almost want it here before we stop clicking. And the same with people. If I've decided, right, Louise has got me really excited about this job, when am I going?
Yeah, I think you lose the
gonna wait.
excitement though, don't you? If I call you and you're really excited, and then there's a week before you hear back, and then there's another week or 2 weeks, and then it just dilutes all the engagement and excitement in the role.
And I've got a real life example of that. Another company I'm working with, it was a role that was extraordinarily difficult to fill. And it was an HR role that was due to cover Eastern Europe, Africa, and the UK. So not your typical, probably HR person, right? Because they needed to have entity knowledge in all of those places. So they'd used a European headhunting company, and it had taken them 7 months to find somebody that remarkably had lived and operated in most of those areas, right? So this is our dream, isn't it, when we find that person? However, it took them several weeks, which he hung in for, and he went to all the interviews. And at the end, he was offered the job. And this is the second point I wanted to make. And then he heard nothing from the offer letter for the duration of his entire notice period. And this individual came back to me, because I was supporting them at the time, and said, I don't think they really want me, because I've not heard anything. And surely they'd be getting me excited about it. Surely they'd keep in touch. And as an HR professional, he was saying, this is what I would be doing if I worked there. So obviously they don't do it today. Now, we were saying, well, that's maybe why you're going, right? They need your expertise. But actually, they hung on to him with a thread. And we're literally about 3 weeks away from the end of his notice period. So fingers crossed it will. But he's certainly not joining with the excitement and energy and passion he had at the point of offer, because we've just gone, oh. And when I spoke to the HR team, they said, oh, yeah, we filled that.
Yeah.
So it was almost like, that's gone. So we've got to remember, haven't we, that people are a bit more needy, I think. And I mean that in a loving, respectful way. We need instant gratification. That we're wanted, we need to feel valued. We need to feel that of all the people you've picked me. And I think we forget that sometimes, don't we?
And all it takes is, someone like me to then call him or her with another opportunity. And then they're having like oh God, it's really frustrating, I haven't heard. And then,
leave him alone.
No. But like,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think, and then that process, if they then go for a client that's 2-week process, and he could then affect, and that's what we're finding.
Yeah. And the other thing I've seen in London a lot lately is the green grass element, where I've seen quite hefty turnover of people who have been wooed by, and I don't mean this rudely, because we probably all do it, but wooed by clever words and dangling of stuff. I know, because in some instances, the companies that have wooed these people, I've done work for and with, and I know they're not going to be any happier there than they are here. But they've been wooed by things. And I think that's that instant gratification. But they're telling me I'm worth this today. You're saying I have to wait for my review. And people are just a little bit more impatient. But engagement isn't all about money. It's really,
I think just going back to I've had a couple of examples recently where I think if I could say one thing, it's like, just question your recruitment process. So question, if you've always done 5 stages, like just question now, like, why do you do 5 stages? Do you need 5 stages, or could you condense them? Could you have 2 people doing in 1 stage? And I think also the other important thing that I've noticed recently is just like really question and ask yourself who's the best person to represent your brand, and do that interview. Because again, a recent example, candidate really excited, first interview, loved it, literally couldn't have been more excited. Second interview, came out, literally was like going into a different role. She's like, the person that interviewed her was negative about the organisation. Obviously wasn't very happy herself, and it all just came over as very bad. And I fed that back to the client. They were like, oh yeah, she is. And I was like, but if you knew that, why did you want her involved in the process?
Even better is when we ask the person who's leaving to interview their replacement. And that's fine if they're leaving really positive and for a really good reason, that they can share their development opportunities. And if there's a wonderful story, great. But sadly, often that's not the case, is it? I think you're right. And for me, it still comes back to value. I think when we're questioning what we're doing, it's what value am I getting from this? Does it add any value to the process? Or is it just what I've always done? But also, what value does this give the candidate? What will they know more about as a result of us adding this bit in? Because sometimes things do take a long time. typically.
It's about
But
managing expectations.
exactly, and adding that value piece in. And I'm bound to say this, aren't I, as well? But also invest maybe in some support for the managers, because hiring is tough more than ever now, more than ever, I think. And just having them feel comfortable, how to demonstrate positivity, even if they're not naturally, exuberant.
No, I think it's really, and also being able to, like, you don't need to be salesy, but selling the culture, the values, like why, even if the manager's not the most experienced interviewer, but why do they like working there? That's a really good.
It's creating a story, isn't it? The story of why you should seriously consider coming and joining us, because I know this is a really old cliche as well, and everybody, if we could hear them, would be groaning when I say this, but it's true as well. An interview process is supposed to be two-way. They are interviewing us as much as we are interviewing them, and candidates aren't, I know yours are, but candidates aren't always coached in the right way either. So we have to kind of take over that role of helping them through this process. There's skills you don't just have, there's skills you need help in developing, aren't they?
No, I know, and I think
it's really interesting.
I think I agree with you on the value thing. I think more than ever you've got to, and also the other thing I was going to say quickly, sorry, is I've just thought about, is that the feedback, quite often we get feedback from candidates and they're like, it was fine, I didn't really find out much about the organisation or the culture, and I think the companies that are attracting and doing something a little bit different, but moving away from that tick list interview, the competency questions, just being a bit more informal with it, and asking candidates, the clients that go in and sort of want to know what drives candidates, what's important to you, what motivates you, they're doing it as well to see whether that fits within their motivations and culture of the company. So, but it also just allows you the opportunity to, if that person then is successful, exactly what motivates them, and then when you're doing their onboarding or in their first week, you can then tweak it, and they're like, oh my god, this is amazing. So I think it's always asking ourselves why am I asking this question in this interview to this person, isn't it? Challenging ourselves, saying if I can't answer that, don't ask the question. It's not important. No, I know, and again, I feel like the rise of strengths-based interviewing is sort of slowly taking over that competency-based interviewing, which is really pleasing. And the other final point, just quickly to mention, is that I think another top tip, what I'm finding at the junior end of the market, is that the companies that are being more open-minded, because it's quite hard, we're finding. Lily and Sarah on my team at the junior end, so the entry-level positions, it's really hard to find people for those roles if you're looking for 2 years HR experience, blah, 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 looking for CIPD. So it's where a lot of companies now have switched on to this and thought, well, actually, what are the skills that makes a good HR professional? And if they don't have HR experience, you interview on skills, interview on their strengths, and then train them up, because then loyalty, and they're really grateful because they've given them opportunity. So I think it's just, again, going back to your why question, why do they need, if you're recruiting an entry-level HR, do they really need HR experience? See, I'd take that even further, as you know, because I know we've had this debate on a couple of occasions, that I worry about why we consistently ask for degrees for CIPD. And I'm not knocking CIPD at all, by the way, just to be really clear. And I think it's certainly an aspiration for people in HR at any level. However, you're right, that demand for it means that we're opting for academic knowledge over sometimes cultural and psychological and values-based skill. And I worry, and what's really interesting, I don't know if anybody saw, but PwC now have removed their mandatory degree qualification for new consultants. And to me, that's huge, because that sets a real tone. I mean, Deloitte's PwC, they sort of set the brand for a level of expertise and skill, didn't they? And I think we do need to shake that up. I think there's many people who have come out, again, I know I don't want this to be all about COVID, because life went on before and will go on for many more. But I think during this whole period, and also during the economic crisis we're going through now, during the unsettling of, global events, etc., people are finding skills and strengths in themselves they didn't know they had. And
if we can tap that, you're going to have an engaged, a motivated, a personable and accessible and inclusive individual. And they're the things it's tough to train in.
Yeah.
So, but you can get somebody to do the learning with CIPD if that's your chosen outlet, to get the skills-based knowledge. So I think it's really interesting, and it's a big question to everybody on here, really, whether are qualifications still mandatory when you recruit, and if so, why? And do you think that's always necessary? Because you may say yes, it is, for different reasons, and it's a personal choice. But it is interesting. The world is changing, definitely.
Yeah. No, it definitely is. And I'm just aware of the time, so I'm just going to ask Graham, who's sat behind the scenes, if we've had any questions.
So it's been a little bit quiet on the question front, but there was somebody's just DM'd me directly, and they've asked, what can businesses do to manage the onboarding process to ensure that the candidates' expectations are met, so they don't avoid disillusion and then they leave within their notice period? Yeah.
I mean, if I can jump in there, I do a lot of support work within onboarding, and I think for me one of the biggest failures is what I call the diving board effect, which is people join and they often, now we're very good, aren't we, at having an induction plan. So you're going to meet this person and you're going to go through this and we're going to show you that, and we're going to, you can do a tour of the offices or whatever it might be. And so their first month, maybe 2 months, a period of time is all organized for them. And there's normally some space where we say to people, and this is to enable you to get your head around this, that and the other, and you'll be invited to this meeting and we'll start you on this project. And then something weird happens at the end of the probation period, or the end of the onboarding, probably not probation actually, but the end of the onboarding. It's sort of like people just go, and suddenly nobody is planning anything for you, quite rightly, but also a lot of that support suddenly drops. And so for me, I always worry about whether onboarding should actually be something we think of in the first year almost. There's going to be that intense front end loaded, but also making sure during that time that those support mechanisms don't go. So a lot of companies now, don't they have buddy systems, they have mentor systems, they have all sorts of support networks, but weirdly HR seem to be often left out of that because they're considered, they don't need it because they are the ones creating it. And so I do worry in the HR space whether we are always given the support we need over an extended period of time. I don't know if you've experienced that, Lou.
Yeah, I think again on the onboarding piece, I think the companies that do it well is just having those regular touch points.
Yeah,
and again, it doesn't need to be like, you could be like, the first couple of weeks, an email, and then arranging a call, and then sending them some reading. I mean, some candidates are great. I've just placed a candidate and she's literally written an email with lots of questions. She said, can we set up a call? She's asked for some pre-reading, anything that she can read ahead of the when she starts, and also they're going to arrange a lunch or a coffee, so with the wider team, different stakeholders. And I think, and then potentially they're going to arrange a couple of calls with the stakeholders that are going to be key for her that she didn't meet as part of the interview process. So basically during that 3-month period, she's got maybe, I don't know, 6 or 8 touch points, which just makes her feel really engaged. But I do agree with you. I think I've noticed the candidates that have started in, I know we don't talk about lockdown and COVID, but the candidates that started, well, I've noticed a couple of things. That the candidates that have done all of their interview over Teams and never been into the office, the tenure of those candidates is under a year. Like, so many candidates are leaving, and I do believe it's because they haven't had the opportunity to be able to go into the office and you can't feel and see the culture over a screen. So I think I was, again, a top tip. I don't know whether, I think the majority of companies have moved away and they're doing a mixture of Teams and then face to face, but there's still companies that do everything over Teams. And I think that person can then start, and then they realize, actually, it's wrong, it's not working from the candidate, it's also not working from the client. And I think it's just really important to be able to have an opportunity for that face-to-face interaction.
I think as well, the other thing which you sort of sparked in me is the ability to have authentic performance conversations from the time you arrive. I don't know if this is true everywhere, but I've worked with some organizations that almost view the onboarding period as a period where we're just nice to you. You're sort of you're almost like a visitor. You know, we want and absolutely we want you to feel welcome and safe and secure and settled. But it's also a period where we're aligning and making sure that we've both got what we want from each other, isn't it? That probation period is a test time for both. So, you know, we need to be really supportive and setting really clear expectations from day one. It doesn't wait until post probation, you know, things like that. So, you know, that's one thing. And the other point, I'd just be really interested, please somebody give me your thoughts on this, because it's something I've been thinking about for a while, is to what degree do HR, so we as HRX, or you as HR experts, who looks after you? You know, who supports you? And the one thing I would really urge is, and I've seen in some organizations now, HR, in my personal opinion, should always have a seat at the executive board table in some form or another. And obviously the advent of the chief people officer role was really designed for that to be the case, that suddenly HR moved from being simply a function to being recognized, as it always was, as running the business, you know, and being a voice that ran the business, a voice that steered the business in the right way. So, but then I come down to say, if you have a CPO, how involved is he or she or they in diluting those messages down from the top? And there are differing levels of expertise in that I work with too. So, you know, I would say if you don't have that voice at the table, if you're not sitting at the table, if you're not hearing what the future of the business strategically is, who looks after you when you're working in one direction and the business is going in another? You know, who's making sure you're being developed? Who's making sure you have a mentor and a buddy or whatever it might be? I may be wrong, but just some companies, maybe they only call me in because they've got challenges. Maybe that could be true also. But, you know, certainly a lot of the companies I work with, there seems to be this sort of HR don't need that because we do that. But I don't think that's true. We all need recognition, reward, support, development, don't we? So, you know, I would really urge anybody on here that if you're not hearing the voice from the top, or you're not receiving development opportunities, or you're not, you don't feel close enough to the business, think about, you know, what you may be able to do, or think about, you know, what you want from that, really, because we don't suddenly stop needing that just because we work in HR.
Yeah, no, and who's having the career conversations with
you? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think it's not just in HR as well. The further you get up, if you're right at the top, unfortunately, you're kind of just left, aren't you? Not
oh yes, and who suffers from that?
yeah. So it's a really important point. Has anyone else commented, Graham, or any other questions?
So there was one question linked to the qualification discussion you had earlier.
Oh yeah.
So have you seen a shift in what attributes are needed for future HR talent as businesses explore different talent pools? So example, is the human interactive element still key, or are there needs for other skills that business is looking for?
So really interesting. I was looking at some research earlier, which is why I just glanced to my right. And there's a report that came out last week, which is 3,500 leadership organizations across Europe. And they are saying that now, for the most, I'm quoting from here now, for the most part, organizations have figured out that the diversity, cultural and knowledge awareness piece is far in excess of pure operational knowledge. So it seems to support what we're saying, that they're saying they need the right people, because we're leading through times that are almost unprecedented still, and that we need to be thinking about well-being, but we also need to be commercially thinking about the business and organization. So I think there is a shift, but I do think, though, it will take a long time, because companies, you know, would we as individuals hire a, so I can't think of a silly example, but a hairdresser who'd never cut hair before, or you know, if we wanted an accountant, would we want to see their qualifications? Although in fairness, I'm just thinking I've never asked my accountant for his, so I might do after this call. But you know, but actually we want to feel safe and secure So it's going to be difficult, isn't it? But certainly, and I'll share this in case anyone would like access to it afterwards. There's a big report looking at saying, yes, we need to get the right people. And if I could take that a stage further and just be a bit controversial for a second, you know how I like to be. I think this kind of, certainly in my experience as an employee, I've experienced two distinct extremes in the HR world. There are the people that really enjoy the planning and the resourcing and the moving people around and restructuring and transformation, but don't necessarily enjoy doing the engagement pieces attached to that and taking people with them. We become a resource to be managed. I know that's using our terminology. And then you get people at the far extreme, the other end, who are very much engaged with engagement, well-being, the development, the nurturing, the people aspect. And I know we're all a mixture of those. I'm talking extremes, but I don't know if anyone can sort of relate to what I'm saying. And we all know what that feels like as an employee if you get one or the other. With one, it can feel quite cold and unfeeling, and with the other, it feels like things aren't moving and we're not in control. So where we want to aim to be, of course, is in the middle bracket. And I think what all the research I've been reading says that we finally recognize we need to get the right person who enjoys the right things and who is able to do the right things over and above whether they've ever done it before. Because even if they have done it before, they've never done it before today. They've never done it before in this world we're living in. So I think it's really interesting, and whether we can change minds quickly, who knows, or whether we should. This is just an opinion. It'd be interesting to hear.
No, I'm quite passionate about the strengths based, and that's what strengths based recruitment. Just don't put. I see it in. We had it in when we were Baden and Clark. The top billers were pushed into management roles because they were like, oh, they're the top billers, they're going to be great managers. And then no one asked, it happened to me, like no one asked me actually, do you want to manage? It was kind of like that was just the natural progression. And actually, I actually did enjoy managing it at the time, but actually I've realised that my strengths are, the external, the client candidate facing. That's where I get my.
I was just going to say, obviously not true of you, Lou, but what we often do is we take people that are really brilliant at this, that lead to success, and we put them into something they're really not very good at.
Or don't enjoy it.
Don't enjoy it. Because, and therefore are not very good at it. Yeah, I know, it's crazy, isn't it?
So then you don't, whereas if you're doing something you love, and again, going back to a cliche, if you do, what's that saying? If you do something you love, and you
don't work a day in your life or something.
Not sure about that,
if only.
but it is, I think, if someone pushed me to do something that I didn't enjoy and was out of my, I know you've all got to be pushed out of your comfort zone, but if I was doing something day in, day out, then I really hated and didn't enjoy it, I'd leave, leave.
And especially if somebody else came along and said, I've seen you and I've seen you're unhappy, I'm going to give you exactly what you want. Or
tell me, going back to like some clients I've sent, this is just like, I love this when this happens, but I've sent them a candidate for a particular role, and they're fed back and said, absolutely love them, they're not right for this role, but they then had conversations with them about, tell me what you enjoy, tell me what you like. I'm not saying, this is quite unique, I'm not saying every organisation can then go and create
just
a role.
Pick your own job.
But they had a role in mind, and then they tweaked it, and then they basically shaped this job for her, and then pulled out what she didn't have the experience in, and gave it to someone else who was really good at it. So I know, going back, I just think if people can be flexible and open and having great conversations, then you'll just get so much more out of it.
Absolutely. And I've seen real shifts when people have recruited people first, and skills second. I've seen some amazing shifts, and that's what I've now, that's what I do now every day, which I love. So I'm conscious of time. Gosh,
I know. So we've got a few. So shall we? Anything else, Graham, before we wrap up?
No, there's nothing left in the chat.
So, I'll just say thank you all for joining us today then, and obviously feel free to connect with Carol or myself directly if
lovely to speak to you.
Have burning questions that you didn't really wanted to put on the chat, or and also connect with connect with me on LinkedIn, because I will be sharing sort of future HR networking events that will be face to face. I know they'll be in the southeast, but we also have offices in London and the north. So if you are based in different locations, do reach out and I can put you in touch with the relevant.
And just a huge thank you, Lou, for having me along, and just carry on fighting the fight, people, because I think HR has been undervalued for so many years, and I think this is our time now to say, right, you know, we're going to thrive and survive. So and a huge thank you on behalf of all your employees as well.
Thank you.